Buenas and half a day. Good evening to everybody in the Guam Congress building. Many of God's blessings. I'm going to call this meeting to order at 5:35 p.m. for the record, and in accordance with the 5 GCA Chapter 8, subsection 8107, public hearing notices were sent on Friday, October 27th, 2023, adhering to the 5-day notice, and a second public notice on Thursday, November 2nd, 48 hours prior. In addition, this hearing was noticed on the legislature's website, www.guamlegislature.com. Written testimonies may be submitted by emailing Senator Muña Barnes at guamlegislature.org, or you may hand deliver it to our office at Suite 411, 134 West Soledad Avenue, Hagåtña, Guam. Ladies and gentlemen, on the agenda, we have Resolution 226-37 COR, which was introduced by myself. It's relative to exercising the right to petition pursuant to Section 1423K of 48 U.S.C. Chapter 8, relative to supporting statehood for the people of Washington, D.C., and specifically urging the United States Congress to pass H.R. 51 and S. 51. Joining me this evening, I'd like to thank our good speaker, Speaker Therese Terlahi, for joining us. And before we proceed, just the general rules of conduct who are in attendance. Those testifying will be recognized in the order of the sign-up sheet. Written testimonies be read and submitted to the committee. Please provide our legislative staff with your written testimony for photocopying. Persons are allowed to present oral testimony only once, and of course, lengthy testimony should be summarized to 5 minutes. Once you are done, please remain in the room for any questioning. Questions and testimonies shall be confined to the substance and natures of the agenda. When you speak, I'd ask that you speak. Please make sure that the microphone is on and that you speak into the microphone, and you state your name for the record, where you're from, and if you're in support of the resolution or not. And at that time, with that being said, we will move on to the hearing, what's on the agenda, which is Resolution 226-37 COR, and it's relative to exercising the right to petition pursuant to Section 1423K of 48 U.S.C. Chapter 8, relative to supporting statehood for the people of Washington, D.C., and specifically urging the United States Congress to pass H.R. 51 and S. 51. We do have someone who signed up to testify on this resolution, and thank again the speaker for being here. And I know he's the Lone Ranger, but I want to take the time before he starts to thank him for taking the long journey from Washington, D.C. to come here. So, Senator Paul Strauss, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Speaker, Madam Speaker. It is a privilege to be before you today. I was in the neighborhood, as it were, and so the trip wasn't quite as long as it otherwise might have been. But I appreciate you accommodating me, your kind invitation. And let me just thank all of the people of Guam for their wonderful hospitality from the moment I landed to all the days that I've spent here on this beautiful, beautiful place. I would encourage any of my fellow Americans to come visit, even if you're not testifying in support of an important public resolution. Let me thank you for the introduction of this resolution in support of D.C. statehood. We have solicited such resolutions from the legislatures of other states and other territories. But this resolution that you're introducing is unique in that you are putting behind it the specific force of law that comes with Guam's unique ability to petition pursuant to Title 48 of the United States Code. And by doing so, you invoke the special obligations of the Congress to consider expeditiously a petition that's based in your legal organic act. The resolution does a wonderful job of identifying the issues that we have in common and a few distinctions. For example, it points out that we in the District of Columbia get the right to vote in the Electoral College, but it's not generally known that that right is not based on our population. under the specific amendment to the Constitution that gave us that representation. We are tied to the population right now of the state of Wyoming. So our representation in the Electoral College isn't based on our population. It says that we can only vote so long as our votes don't exceed that of the least populous state. Certainly an important step, but not exactly the equality that we would deserve. And of course, Guam doesn't have the right to vote for the commander-in-chief, despite the fact that it sends more people per capita in our military than any other territory. And I've met so many of our men and women in uniform here, and let me again take this opportunity to thank them for their continued service. The residents of Washington, D.C. are leaders in another way. We pay more federal taxes per capita than any other territory. And so it is that unique coincidence of a territory giving more than the other states and yet being denied the political equality that comes from that status. Your resolution correctly points out that no other capital in the world denies the right to self-governance to its people in the capital, and it points out that this is a serious violation, not just of the fundamental constitutional principles of equal protection and fairness, but arguably violates international law as well. I was recently at a conference on international law, and it just boggles the mind how so many people look to the United States as an example of leadership in this area, and yet we devalue that legacy by not according full citizenship to all of the Americans who live under our laws, who serve under our flag, whether you're on the mainland or in one of the territories. And so your resolution cites the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as it should, that says that no distinction should be made on the basis of political, jurisdictional, or other status. Other international bodies, such as the OSCE, the OAS, have taken up the issue of D.C. statehood, just as the UN has considered Guam status as a non-self-governing territory. It is time in America's third century that we really solve this problem once and for all. And finally, we're here on the status of D.C. For us, statehood is really the fundamental option that we want. We are certainly not here to impose our version of status on anybody else, and we know that the decision of the people of Guam has yet to be finally made. But for us, we have had our plebiscites, we have had our referendums, and 86% of Washington, D.C. voters have voted in support of being a state. The bill for D.C. statehood has passed the United States House of Representatives twice, but we have yet to be able to pass it in the House and then get concurrent passage in the United States Senate. And your resolution rightly points out that D.C. voters continue to recommit themselves to statehood by electing a full congressional delegation, despite Congress not necessarily giving us that privilege yet. And that's myself and the other members of our so-called shadow congressional delegation. And so we appreciate this gesture of solidarity. I was struck by the associate professor from the University of Guam, Professor Ragatel's remarks at the ceremony that we attended for Independence Day of Micronesia. And he talked about the historic culture of the canoes and the first explorers who would set off in the boats. And he stressed the importance of the oars going in the same direction. Well, our territories may not be contiguous, but we are literally in the same boat, as it were. And I think we should take the professor's advice. We should continue to strategize. We should continue to understand each other better. And we should make sure that those oars in the ancient tradition of the Chamorro people continue to be pulled in the same direction. Thank you so much for the opportunity to appear before you today. I appreciate this gesture, and of course, I would welcome any questions that the members of the legislature would have. Let me note that DC and Guam are also together in the fact that we have a unicameral legislature. And so it's just one of the many unique coincidences that tie our two people together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator. And before I do any comments, I'd like to yield to the speaker and ask her if she'd like to say any comments or ask any questions.
Well, thank you for your testimony, and I'm honored that you are here and willing to engage with us in this discussion. I'm a little curious, and I have to acknowledge my being not that well informed, maybe, but I'm curious if maybe you could explain, and maybe it might help us as well to understand what opposition there is to your, as you said, it passed twice in the House, and so what does the field look like in that regard?
Well, thank you for that question, and I understand why you're asking it. It's difficult for me to speak for the opponents, but some of the opposition we get is that people fundamentally don't understand the nature of Washington, D.C. They say, for example, that we're too small to be a state, and yet our population exceeds that of at least two other states, Wyoming and Vermont. It is comparable to Delaware, Alaska, Montana, some of the smaller states in population that have at-large members. Some people think that Washington, D.C. is not home to as many people as it is. They see us sort of as the attractions and the tourist things, but there's a sense that perhaps at the end of the day it closes up and everybody goes back somewhere else, kind of like a federal version of Disneyland. Some people think mistakenly that the District of Columbia receives and is funded by the federal government, when in fact the $4 billion we give to the federal treasury and the rank of paying more federal taxes than many other states, the resolution says 22, but I think actually that number is a little higher. We are a donor jurisdiction, and so we're #1 per capita. We're higher in the aggregate. I thought it was 14, but we'll confirm that number. And so we're really supporting the federal government. It's not like the White House or any of these other folks are paying a water bill or supporting the utilities, so they're wrong on that. So there's a lot of factual misinformation that they have. But unfortunately, a lot of the argument is political. There are members of one political party that are concerned about what would the impact be of having 2 additional voting senators from another political party. And there is a sense that for that reason alone, D.C. may be too blue in the eyes of some to be a state. But for generations, there has been a legacy of federal oversight of the district that allowed them to treat us essentially as a colony. Congress still has the ability to overturn any of the laws that our elected legislature passes. And so when our Council of the District of Columbia passes a law, if Congress doesn't like it, they can change it. And there are many members of Congress that, for whatever reason, continue to like that power and are reluctant to give it up. But democracy is about hearing all voices. Democracy is about all petitions. Earlier today, I had the privilege of speaking to one of the classes of political science at the University of Guam, and we talked about it like an orchestra. If you were to suddenly take out the violins and refuse to let them play, you're not really punishing the string section so much as diminishing the quality of the music for everyone. Our democracy is like that. When our voice isn't heard, when the voice of any American isn't represented equally, the quality of that democracy is diminished. And unfortunately, there are some people who are looking more towards partisan advantage as opposed to letting all voices be heard. I have been in this position since 1997, and I have seen a fundamental change in the way that my voting Senate colleagues continue to work with each other, and a decline in the comedy of that. That is not a good reason to deny equal rights to over 700,000 American citizens. It's not a good reason to deny political equality or self-determination of the people of Guam. All Americans deserve equality, and we know that that message is understood uniquely by our fellow Americans here on this beautiful island.
Thank you very much, Senator. If the House bill passes and the Senate bill passes, is there any additional step for the District of Columbia to go through?
No, the Constitution is pretty clear that the admission of new states is the specific province of Congress, although the President traditionally signs the Statehood Admission Act as a pro forma exercise of executive power. One of the things that this bill, our bill, does is that it preserves the seat of federal government to the area that is actually federal in jurisdiction. And so right now we have an area called the National Capital Service Area. It contains the White House, the Capitol Building, so many of the wonderful Smithsonian museums that people enjoy visiting. And it's an important legal distinction because it talks about whose government does what portion. A significant part of Guam, of course, is under federal territory, and so you have your federal districts and your local areas, and we have the same. That would be preserved, and so the constitutional vision of a unique seat of federal government under federal control would be preserved, but we're taking the residential portion out.
I see.
So nobody would live in that new federal district. Well, there's one family that gets a big white house, but other than that, nobody would live there. And I'm told those residents are temporary and typically vote somewhere else. The current occupant votes back in Delaware. So we would really preserve the federal area, admit the rest of the district as a state, and then hopefully have two new senators and a voting member of Congress that would get to work serving the American people at a time when, let's face it, we need all the help we can get.
Sure. Well, that makes sense. That seems like that would alleviate a big concern from a lot of people. So I'm really grateful to you for your insight here today and for the Vice Speaker's leadership in this measure, moving it forward, and wishing you the best, Senator Tsizus Masi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Tsizus Masi, Madam Speaker, for being here and sharing your comments and your inquiries to Senator Paul Strauss. And I personally want to say that we probably met each other 2 or 3 terms ago, and in our efforts to try and fight for our cause, you for statehood and us, the people of Guam, just to try and determine our political status. We've been at it since 1950, since the Organic Act that's been signed with the commitment that our people of Guam will choose what kind of governance it wants. And though there may be differences, there's so much similarities as we continue to move forward. And if there's one thing I'd like to say to you is you've never given up your commitment every time. As Speaker Terlahi had mentioned, it was you said it was passed in the House of Representatives twice, and yet still not going through the Senate, but not giving up. So I always say, right, if you first don't succeed, you try again until, something's got to budge sooner than later. But not giving up is probably the biggest strength that one can have. And I can share that story. Since World War II, Guam got liberated in 1944, and we, from 1941 to 1944 was World War II. We were bombed in a war that we never asked for as a people of Guam. And so many years later, there was a commitment for the people of Guam, the survivors, to get their claim. And we finally just closed that chapter after much, not just heartache, just a lot of struggles, trials and tribulations, but literally knowing that there was a symbol of at least trying to understand from a perspective of a World War II survivor, knowing that they just wanted that sense to know that they were around and be given that. We finally closed that chapter. We never gave up so many decades later. And in the same effort as we continue to move forward to try and see how we can decolonize ourselves, and a commitment that Uncle Sam said, you know what, since the signing of the Organic Act, this commitment would be there for your choosing, not ours, but for the people of Guam. So in those efforts, when I was asked to work on this resolution, I said I would support it. And one would say, well, why? When you have no sense of, I mean, it's not going to make a difference. You don't vote there. And I bet symbolically, a fight and a quest to move forward to work with what was rightfully asked by the people. And that's something that we continue to work with. So I'm really, really appreciative, Speaker, that you've come here tonight to join me in this resolution. And Senator Strauss, I know you've come a very, very long way to come to this public hearing, but for you to come here personally, undonkulu na si Zeus Masi, for being here to testify in support of this resolution, and a commitment that I will expedite the committee report and see if we can get it in our next session or before the year closes up. So with that being said, if there's no one else to speak, I will note, thank you again for being here, Senator Strauss. I will call this Resolution 226-30COR, which is relative to exercising the right to petition pursuant to 1423K of 48 U.S.C. Chapter 8, relative to supporting statehood for the people of Washington, D.C., and specifically urging the United States Congress to pass H.R. 51 and S. 51. If anybody else wishes to present written testimony, they can do so by sending it to Senator Muña Barnes at guamlegislature.org, or they may send it or hand deliver it to 163 Chalan Santo Papa, Hagatnya, Guam, 96910, or to my office at 134 West Soledad Avenue, Suite 411, Hagatnya, Guam, 96910. This resolution number 226-37 has been publicly heard today, and we will adjourn at 5:57 p.m. Si Zeus Masi and Si Zeus Bini DC. Salamasi. We are adjourned. Thank you.